Welcome to Globewise Entertainment, your ultimate destination for the wildest, most controversial, and unforgettable stories from Hollywood and beyond. Today, we're diving deep into the shocking world of 12 Grindhouse films that said, "To hell with censors," movies so raw, violent, and unapologetic that they pushed the limits of what audiences and censors could handle. From banned screenings to worldwide outrage, these films didn't just entertain, they broke every rule in the book. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that button now so you don't miss our next dive into cinema's most outrageous history. And tell us in the comments, which Grindhouse film on this list shocked you the most? 1. Blood Feast, 1963. When Herschel Gordon Lewis unleashed Blood Feast in 1963, audiences had never seen anything like it. Marketed as the first gore film, this low-budget Grindhouse shocker became the godfather of splatter cinema. At a time when Hollywood played it safe with thrillers and crime dramas, Blood Feast tore through every unwritten rule of censorship. The story follows a deranged caterer who prepares a gruesome feast for an ancient Egyptian goddess. On paper, it sounded like another B-movie oddity. But on screen, the film's practical effects, though crude by today's standards, were jaw-dropping for 1963 audiences. Buckets of fake blood, over-the-top screams, and outrageous murder scenes turned the movie into a cultural firestorm. Critics called it garbage. Religious groups demanded it be banned. And yet, Grindhouse theaters couldn't keep up with the demand. Young audiences flocked to see what all the fuss was about, and Blood Feast quietly made history as one of the first films to openly challenge censorship with unapologetic shock value. Looking back, it's easy to see why this film is still legendary. Without Blood Feast, the entire gore genre, from 70s Grindhouse to today's slasher franchises, might never have existed. Herschel Gordon Lewis didn't just make a movie, he made a defiant statement: "To hell with censors, we'll give audiences what Hollywood won't." 2. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Few Grindhouse films have sent shockwaves through audiences like Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1974, this low-budget nightmare redefined horror, leaving viewers trembling and censors fuming. What made it so infamous wasn't gallons of gore, as many assumed, but the relentless sense of dread, disturbing atmosphere, and raw documentary-like style. The film follows a group of friends who stumble upon a family of cannibals deep in rural Texas, including the now legendary horror icon Leatherface, wielding his roaring chainsaw. Despite its reputation as one of the bloodiest films ever made, Hooper actually kept most of the violence off-screen. Instead, he used clever editing, sound design, and unnerving close-ups to make audiences believe they had witnessed something far more grotesque. But censors weren't buying the trick. Across countries like the UK, Australia, and Germany, the movie was banned or heavily restricted. Even in the United States, it fought tooth and nail with ratings boards. Hooper hoped for a PG rating by minimizing gore, but the MPA slapped it with an R due to its shocking intensity. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre * became a box office sensation, earning over $30 million on a $140,000 budget, making it one of the most profitable horror films ever. Its legacy is undeniable. It paved the way for the slasher genre, influenced generations of filmmakers, and remains a prime example of how Grindhouse cinema could terrify without big studio backing or censor approval. This wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake that proved sometimes the scariest horrors are the ones you don't see. 3. I Drink Your Blood, 1970. When Grindhouse audiences of the 1970s walked into theaters, they expected sleaze, gore, and shock, but I Drink Your Blood took things a step further. Directed by David Edelstein, this lurid exploitation gem was one of the first films to ever receive the dreaded X rating for violence instead bold, instantly making it a cult legend. The story follows a small town terrorized by a group of satanic hippies who are dosed with rabies-laced meat pies. Yes, you heard that right. Soon, The group turns into frothing, psychotic maniacs, spreading bloodshed and madness wherever they go. It was a raw, feverish nightmare that felt half horror and half public service announcement on the dangers of rabies. Censors were horrified by the sheer brutality, beheadings, blood-spattered rampages, and disturbing images of drug-fueled violence. In fact, I Drink Your Blood was banned in several countries and heavily cut in the US, with some theaters forced to trim out entire reels before local boards would allow it to screen. But the controversy only fueled its popularity in Grindhouse circuits, where the movie was often paired with I Eat Your Skin to form one of the most infamous double bills in drive-in history. Over time, the film became a badge of rebellion for 70s horror fans, a gory middle finger to censorship boards that tried to sanitize cinema. Today, it stands as one of the defining examples of Grindhouse excess, dirty, bloody, and unashamed. 4. Ms. 45, 1981. When it comes to raw, unapologetic Grindhouse cinema, Abel Ferrara's Ms. 45 is one of the boldest punches to censorship ever thrown. Released in 1981, this gritty revenge thriller centers on Thana, a mute seamstress in New York City who suffers a brutal double assault in a single day. But instead of playing the role of silent victim, Thana transforms into a relentless avenger, arming herself with a .45 pistol and targeting men across the city. What made Ms. 45 so controversial wasn't just its graphic depiction of violence and trauma, but its unflinching take on female vengeance, a theme that censors at the time considered far too extreme. The film was chopped to pieces by ratings boards, especially for its shocking climax set at a Halloween party, where Thana, dressed as a nun, unleashes bloody chaos on her oppressors. Critics were divided. Some called it exploitation trash, while others hailed it as a raw feminist statement hiding in Grindhouse clothes. Over time, Ms. 45 gained cult status for its refusal to water down the rage of its protagonist. Today, it's celebrated as one of the purest examples of Grindhouse cinema saying, "To hell with censors, we're telling this story our way." By rejecting compromise and shocking audiences with its brutality, Ms. 45 paved the way for later revenge films that dared to push back against censorship and polite cinema standards. 5. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. When it comes to Grindhouse cinema, few films push the boundaries of taste, shock, and censorship quite like Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Released in 1975, this Canadian exploitation film wasn't just controversial, it was a full-on assault against the moral guardians of the time. The film stars Diane Thorne as the sadistic commandant of a Nazi prison camp, where prisoners are subjected to horrific experiments and brutal punishments. Unlike most Grindhouse villains, Ilsa was both commanding and terrifyingly charismatic, which made her one of the most infamous female antagonists in cinema history. What really shook the censors, though, was the movie's unapologetic use of graphic violence, sexual content, and taboo themes. The film wasn't subtle about its intention. It was made to shock, provoke, and guarantee word-of-mouth controversy. And it succeeded. Banned in multiple countries, edited into oblivion in others, and slapped with the dreaded X-rating asterisk in the United States, the film became a cult phenomenon precisely because it was so hard to find. Here's the wild twist. Despite being condemned by critics and watchdog groups, Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS became so profitable that it spawned a whole series of sequels, including Ilsa, Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks Asterisk, and Ilsa, the Wicked Warden Star. The character of Ilsa turned into a Grindhouse icon, embodying everything censors feared: raw brutality, taboo-breaking storytelling, and unapologetic exploitation. Today, the movie stands as one of the most infamous examples of 1970s Grindhouse excess. It represents an era when filmmakers didn't just flirt with controversy, they dove headfirst into it, daring audiences to look away while ensuring that no censor could silence their vision. 6. Rolling Vengeance, 1987. If you thought monster trucks were just for weekend fairs and dirt arenas, Rolling Vengeance will make you think again. This Canadian Grindhouse gem took a classic revenge story, strapped it to a 7-ton, fire-breathing monster truck, and drove it straight through the boundaries of good taste, and the censors weren't happy about it. The story follows Joey Rosso, a mild-mannered truck driver whose life is destroyed when a group of drunken town bullies, protected by a corrupt, sleazy father figure, cause the death of his family. Instead of going to the cops, Joey builds a literal death machine on wheels, a custom monster truck fitted with claws, drills, and enough horsepower to crush entire buildings. What follows is a gleeful, over-the-top symphony of destruction, as Joey dishes out vengeance one flattened villain at a time. Why did censors hate it? The movie mixes raw vigilante justice with absurd levels of carnage. Houses get leveled, vehicles shredded, and bodies mangled in ways that were considered too exploitative for mainstream release. Add in sleazy subplots of corruption, alcoholism, and sexual violence, and it was easy to see why distributors slapped it with restrictive ratings that kept it out of many theaters. Yet, that's exactly what made Rolling Vengeance a Grindhouse legend. It didn't try to be subtle, it was unapologetically loud, violent, and cathartic. For fans of exploitation cinema, it delivered a guilty pleasure thrill ride that most studios wouldn't dare touch. Today, the film has found new life with cult audiences who crave the kind of raw, no-rules cinema Hollywood wouldn't dare produce now. Rolling Vengeance said, "To hell with censors," and in doing so, it paved its own path to Grindhouse immortality. 7. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. The Queens of Grindhouse Rebellion. If there was ever a film that wore the badge of "To hell with censors" proudly, it was Switchblade Sisters. Directed by exploitation legend Jack Hill, this 1975 cult classic threw subtlety out the window and gave audiences a raw, unapologetic tale of female gang warfare in a gritty urban jungle. The movie follows the Dagger Debs, a tough all-girl gang led by Lace and her fiery Lieutenant Patch. But when a newcomer named Maggie shakes up the pecking order, betrayal, violence, and bloody street justice explode across the screen. It wasn't just a girl gang movie, it was a rebellious Grindhouse answer to the male-dominated exploitation flicks of the time. What really made Switchblade Sisters infamous was its cocktail of violence, profanity, sexual tension, and unapologetic female empowerment. Censors of the 1970s were already on edge with biker gangs and blaxploitation, but the idea of women fighting, stabbing, and even outsmarting the men was downright scandalous. Many theaters either refused to show it or slapped it with warnings, fearing it would corrupt audiences. Of course, that controversy only helped its reputation. The film gained underground cult status, celebrated for its gritty realism, sleazy energy, and feminist undertones disguised in Grindhouse grit. Quentin Tarantino himself later re-released the film under his Rolling Thunder Pictures label, calling it one of his favorites, cementing its place in exploitation film history. Switchblade Sisters wasn't trying to be polished, safe, or politically correct. It snarled in the face of censors, serving up raunchy, violent, and rebellious entertainment that screamed what Grindhouse cinema was all about: shock, chaos, and freedom. 8. Coffy, 1973. When it comes to Grindhouse cinema, few films hit harder than Coffy, 1973. Directed by Jack Hill and starring the legendary Pam Grier, this film didn't just push boundaries, it smashed them wide open. On the surface, Coffy is a revenge thriller. Grier plays a nurse who takes the law into her own hands after her younger sister falls victim to drug dealers. But what made it notorious wasn't just the violence, it was the raw, unapologetic way it portrayed corruption, exploitation, and the seedy underworld of the 1970s. Pam Grier's performance was groundbreaking. She wasn't just the love interest or the sidekick, she was the tough, fearless lead, taking down mobsters, pimps, and crooked politicians. That alone rattled censors who weren't used to seeing a strong black woman dominate the screen in such a fiery role. The film's mix of shocking violence, gritty realism, and bold social commentary made it both a target of censorship and a cult classic. Critics at the time accused it of being too graphic, too political, and too provocative. But audiences loved it. Pam Grier became the first female action superstar, and Coffy helped pave the way for the entire blaxploitation movement. Even today, Coffy is celebrated as a rebellious grindhouse classic that gave Hollywood one clear message: you can't censor raw truth. 9. The Last House on the Left, 1972. In 1972, filmmaker Wes Craven shocked the world with his directorial debut, The Last House on the Left star. Long before he created A Nightmare on Elm Street * or reinvented horror with Scream, Craven dove headfirst into the grindhouse scene with a film that seemed designed to test just how far audiences and censors were willing to go. On the surface, it was marketed with the now iconic tagline, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie." But this was no ordinary horror flick. Inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, the film stripped away Hollywood gloss and presented its story with raw, unsettling realism. What made The Last House on the Left so controversial wasn't just its violence, it was its refusal to play by the rules. Where most films of the time relied on suggestion, Craven pushed boundaries, delivering an unpolished grindhouse nightmare that felt far too real for 1970s audiences. The backlash was immediate. The movie was banned or heavily censored in multiple countries, cut into countless versions, and debated by critics who called it both exploitation trash and a daring piece of cinema. Yet, despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the film became a defining grindhouse classic. Today, The Last House on the Left is remembered as a fearless, taboo-shattering work that helped establish Wes Craven as a master of horror. Love it or hate it, the film set the tone for an entire wave of 70s cinema that proudly said, "To hell with censors." 10. Class of 1984-1982. In the early 1980s, when society was already panicking about gangs, drugs, and youth violence, Class of 1984 stormed onto screens like a Molotov cocktail. Directed by Mark Lester, this shocking grindhouse gem told the story of a music teacher who takes a job at an inner-city high school, only to discover that his students are armed, ruthless, and running the school like a criminal empire. What made the film so controversial was its unflinching depiction of teenage delinquency, complete with brutal assaults, classroom chaos, drug use, and a revenge-fueled finale that censors thought was far too extreme for audiences. The violence wasn't just stylized, it felt uncomfortably real, with gang members terrorizing teachers, students, and even families. Censors in several countries immediately raised red flags, banning or heavily cutting the film due to its graphic scenes and themes of vigilante justice. In Canada, the home of its production, authorities worried it would inspire real-life copycats in schools. Yet, the movie struck a nerve with audiences, especially as news headlines in the 1980s were filled with stories about rising urban crime. Adding to its cult legacy, Class of 1984 featured a young Michael J. Fox in one of his earliest roles, long before Back to the Future made him a household name. The film became a grindhouse staple, influencing countless schoolyard revenge movies that followed, and even spawned a loose sequel, Class of 1999. To this day, Class of 1984 is remembered as a bold middle finger to censors, proving that sometimes the scariest horror isn't about monsters or ghosts, it's about the classroom right down the street. 11. Death Race 2000, 1975. A satirical bloodbath on wheels. When it comes to grindhouse cinema, few films crash through the barriers of taste, censorship, and morality quite like Death Race 2000. Released in 1975 and produced by Roger Corman, the king of B-movies, this film was a twisted cocktail of satire, bold, and sadistic violence that drove censors crazy. Set in a dystopian future America, the government entertains the masses with a brutal transcontinental road race where drivers score points by running down pedestrians. The crazier the kill, the higher the score. Critics accused the film of glorifying violence, but that was the genius of it. Beneath the blood and camp, It was a savage political commentary on media obsession, authoritarian control, and America's thirst for spectacle. Starring a young David Carradine as the leather-clad anti-hero Frankenstein and a pre-Rocky Sylvester Stallone as the hot-headed Machine Gun Joe, the movie turned low-budget carnage into cultural provocation. Censors wanted cuts for its scenes of graphic hit-and-run deaths, nudity, and over-the-top gore, but Corman knew controversy sold tickets, and it worked. The film became a Grindhouse cult classic, banned or heavily censored in several countries for its gleeful brutality. Yet, it endured, spawning sequels, remakes, and even inspiring video games like Carmageddon. Death Race 2000 didn't just flip off the censors, it weaponized exploitation into a dark comedy that feels shockingly relevant in today's world of viral chaos and reality TV politics. This wasn't just a Grindhouse car wreck. It was a satirical missile aimed straight at the establishment. 12. Maniac, 1980. If there was ever a film that embodied the raw, sleazy, and shocking world of Grindhouse cinema, Maniac is it. Released in 1980, this ultra-gritty psychological horror immediately sparked outrage among critics, censors, and even feminist groups, who protested its screenings for what they saw as extreme violence against women. Directed by William Lustig and starring Joe Spinell, who also co-wrote the script, the movie follows Frank Zito, a deeply disturbed man haunted by childhood abuse, who prowls New York City at night, murdering women and scalping his victims. Spinell's chilling performance blurred the line between exploitation and an almost tragic character study, making the film unforgettable but also unbearably disturbing for many audiences. What really pushed Maniac into infamy was its unflinching practical effects, crafted by makeup maestro Tom Savini. One scene in particular, where a shotgun blast obliterates a victim's head in shocking detail, was so realistic that theaters faced calls for bans. Savini himself even played the victim in that scene, cementing it as one of horror's most notorious special effects showcases. Censors across the US, the UK, Germany, and other European countries came down hard. In the UK, it was branded a video nasty and banned outright for years. In Germany, screenings were limited or cut, and critics called it a sick celebration of misogyny. But despite, or perhaps because of, the backlash, Maniac became a cult sensation. Fans argued it wasn't just a gore fest, it was a gritty look into the mind of a broken man, a twisted reflection of urban decay in late 70s New York. Today, Maniac is both reviled and revered. It remains one of the most infamous Grindhouse films ever made, one that spit in the face of censors, dared to push horror to its ugliest limits, and earned its place in underground cinema history. And that wraps up our countdown of 12 Grindhouse films that said, "To hell with censors." Movies that shocked audiences, enraged critics, and left an unforgettable mark on cinema history. These films weren't just entertainment, they were defiance on film reels, daring to go where Hollywood never dared. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more untold stories, shocking film histories, and deep dives into the world of movies they don't want you to see. Now we want to hear from you. Which Grindhouse classic on this list do you think went the furthest in flipping off the censors? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading what you have to say. Until next time, keep watching bold cinema, and stay tuned for more from Globewise Entertainment.